Greetings. This is your little mini lecture for chapter two. Um, so, because the course is online, it's going to be a little bit different than our day-to-day kind of interactions. One of the things I noticed during COVID-19, um, and online classes in general, is there's a tendency to kind of maybe overdo it with the lectures, and I'm trying to find a way to not do that and to find ways to keep you guys engaged instead of sitting here and listening to me drone on about these things. Obviously, in class, in person, is really the place to get these kind of discussions because then you guys can really ask questions. This feels very one directional. So I'm going to give you this little lecture because I think it's important that I share this to kind of maybe you guys can understand where I'm coming from a little bit more, and maybe it will help you understand the non-digital experience and meme project with a little bit greater clarity. So we're going to talk about the medium. I'm very interested in the medium, passionate about the medium. It's kind of my thing. Um, so a narrated PowerPoint's kind of boring here, but let's just dive in, and I'll share my side comments as we go through this. So the medium begins. To understand the medium, I guess we need to understand that when I'm talking about the medium, I'm talking about communication mediums. So you've probably heard the term medium in your art class in school, in high school, middle school, elementary school, or whatever. You probably heard the term medium. Oil paint is a medium. Pastel is a medium. Charcoal is a medium. In communication studies, when I talk about medium, I'm talking about the ways that we communicate and we transmit information. So the first medium was the story. Just sitting around telling us stories. I'm sure every single one of us has, heard, has a family member that tells stories or a friend that tells stories. I grew up in a family where my grandfather always told the same stories over and over and over again. And we would always be like, "Grandpa, you told that story already." And that's an old medium. That's, thousands and thousands of years old for our species. Storytelling is an important medium. It's synchronous, which means it's real time. It's not a recorded thing. I mean, it can be. Obviously, there's digital storytelling. There's stories in movies and television and in books and stuff. But when we talk about storytelling, we're talking about this face to face kind of thing where the cues are there's multitudes of cues. When I see the storyteller scratching their head, trying to remember something, in turn, when I'm the storyteller watching my audience, I see the audience maybe looking confused. I can quick add some detail to the story so they're not as confused. There's the smell of individuals. There's the sound. When somebody's really quiet and soft spoken, you got to listen really hard. These are the characteristics of that medium, right? That medium is synchronous. It's immediate, right? It's face to face. I'm not going to be able to wake up, from a long nap after the story's done and go to the same place where the story was being told and benefit from the story, right? This is not a newspaper. I can't be like I'll read the newspaper later, leave it on the table for me, right? It doesn't work that way. The story is synchronous. It's in real time. It's ephemeral. It's fleeting. No story. No two stories are the same. Likely. That's the characteristic of this medium, right? That's what we mean when I talk about characteristics of the medium. We want to start thinking about the characteristics of the medium and what characteristics make the medium as such. So, next we have writing. Now, writing comes along in the Western world about 2,500 years ago. Um, we know that writing, came along in the Mid East, in Samaria, which is one of the first civilizations, um, about 6,000 years ago. Actually, the first words that we know of were written down about 6,000 years ago. Now, a little note on this class. Some of you guys may find it funny that I don't post grades on Blackboard, okay? I'm unapologetic about that. The reason I don't post grades on Blackboard is because I want you to learn to organize, okay? Organization is a crucial part of a written culture. We have to organize things in large amounts on a daily basis. Some of us let our organization get kind of messy. I'm one of those people. I have a email. I wouldn't even probably be here today if I wasn't able to search my old emails to find a paper I wrote in undergrad that I sent to myself, which I submitted as a writing sample to the first graduate school I attended back in 2011. Writing and organization are crucial. So as it relates back to accounting, or keeping track of your own grades, the first symbols used in the written language were merely totems that kept track of bales of hay coming and going from the storehouse. The person would come, get their grains, and then the person at the storehouse would make a token for them and keep that as their debt. And once their debt was paid off, then the person with their token would take the token away to show that they had paid their debt to the person who was distributing the grains. So this is the origin of writing. Before we had a way of accounting, we were using symbols. So things like names became one of the next things. But the first things that we learned to write were to keep track of food, and keep track of livestock, and keep track of all of those things. Accounting is the seed of writing. So one of my kind of meta lessons for the semester is I want you to learn to keep track of your own grades. Every assignment I send you, you should take that assignment and save it in a folder for this course. And if you ask me what your grade is, I'm going to say your grade is the sum of all of these things. And if there's anything that you're confused about, if you didn't receive something, just email me. I'm happy to discuss with you what your grade is, but the point of this is to get you better at organizing. I didn't become an organizer overnight. I have filing cabinets now. During COVID-19, I had the privilege of, and even just today, making folders and organizing things that should have been organized months ago, okay? Things that should have been organized years ago. I've been now just getting around to organizing it. So writing and organization go hand in hand. So that was a kind of a big roundabout way to talk about writing. The characteristics of writing are I can put something in writing because I don't want to forget it. Remember the token we talked about at the granary? If I want to remember something, I put it in writing. If I want my daughter to know something, I put it in writing. We have a little book for her that we write stories about her as she's growing so she can look back on those things later. That's how our species, saves energy. It would take me for you guys to receive all the information you needed from a professor would be impossible. It would take you 30, 40, 50 years of schooling to get out of school if you didn't also read books. Books is where all of that information is stored. So, because a teacher can't teach you 24 hours a day, right? You're not going to have instant access to a teacher to always say something. Then you also need books to augment that. Interestingly enough, Plato, many of you guys have heard of him before. Plato said things like, get off Twitter. Plato, right? Twitter quotes or misattributed quotes on Twitter are one of my favorite things. But Plato, who is a very famously quoted person on social media, I see people sharing motivational quotes from Plato all the time. Plato hated writing. Imagine that. A teacher who hated writing. Plato thought writing would make our memories weak. He hated writing. He thought writing was stupid. He thought you were an idiot if you were writing. So the next time someone says, hey, get off your phone, you kids, you're going to ruin the world, just tell them Plato hated writing. Go shove it, man, right? Every generation hates the new technologies that come along. When Plato was a teacher, Writing was a new thing. In Plato's time, people were still memorizing everything that they needed to know. That's what writing does. Writing stores things. Writing is asynchronous, right? So if telling a story is a synchronous thing, writing is an asynchronous thing, and it allows us to store things for later, for future generations, right? For basic. If civilization were to collapse tomorrow, it would enable us to store things, indefinitely, as long as somebody can read what we're writing. That's the difficult part. If anybody's ever tried to read like a 900-year-old like English play or something, it's very difficult to make out because the language is not so. It hasn't stayed the same. Even listening to radio broadcasts from 70, 80 years ago sound, people talked quite differently than they do today. So writing has its own characteristics, right? It can be taken places, right? I don't need to go. I can write a letter and send it across the world. Interesting thing, I tried to send a letter to my family overseas, and it got sent back because, I guess the third world is not something that USPS is shipping to. So, I don't have to travel to send my message when I have it written. I can put it in an envelope and send it, and I don't have to be there to share my message. That's one of the characteristics of writing. So that is another development on the medium, right? So I can send one handwritten letter, right? But maybe not so easy to send 100 handwritten letters. My hand might get a little tired. That's where we get something like Gutenberg's printing press. So the medium changes once you add the printing press, and we can use movable typeface, and we can print up the same letter 1,000 times over. We can have something like an American Revolution, right? So, Common Sense, Thomas Paine's famous, pamphlet, which helped to incite the revolution of the bourgeoisie in the United States. So Thomas Paine created this pamphlet and got landowners very upset about what the British were going to do to them. So in turn, he sparked a revolution amongst the literate. So the literate people were able to read Thomas Paine's thoughts. He didn't have to write every single person who owned land in the U.S. or the colonies at the time a personal letter. He could print it up on Gutenberg's printing press. So if the letter enables us to send something and we don't have to be there, and it enables our words to live after we die, the printing press enables us to expand and send these things much further. So the printing press has been accredited with helping to spread Christianity. The printing press helps to spread ideas, and once you have many ideas, it's difficult to kill those ideas, right? So, burning books is fine, and banning things and all that stuff is fine, but if you have 1,000 books, you have to find all 1,000. What if you can only find 999, and one of those books slips out? You can't kill an idea if it has traveled far. You can kill the person who had the idea, you can burn most of their things, but if they printed it up on a printing press, it's going to be much more difficult to track them all down. And that was what the printing press did, was it enabled many more people to read at the same time and be influenced by this device. So the massification of the printed word was a beautiful thing. This is the first mass media. Before, we used to have to, I'm saying we, not in my lifetime, but 1,000 years ago, people would go to school in the monastery and they would copy down what their teacher said word for word for word. That was what a lecture was. A lecture was me reading out of a book, and you would copy every word that I said. That was your lecture. And then when you went to go defend your education, you would come with a stack of books and say, this is Aristotle's rhetoric. This is Cicero. This is metaphysics. This is blah, 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 right? These are all the books that I copied when I was in class. And that's what class was. How boring that must have been before the printing press came along. And then people could afford books. It made books affordable. One of the characteristics of a medium is its affordability. I can't afford a book that's handwritten, right? The Bible was not in everybody's house before the printing press. right? Poor people could only, listen to what their priest had said, right? We didn't know, right? We didn't know what if the priest was telling the truth or not. We just had to take their word, right? Because we didn't have access to this thing, right? A handwritten Bible was a very valuable thing back then. Then the printing press came along, and that's at the same time as, Calvinism, right? Martin Luther comes along, and we get this whole Protestant Reformation. The Gutenberg printing press has been credited with, that Protestant Reformation. As soon as we know that we can read the Bible in our own home and we can afford to have the Bible in our own home, then bam, the medium changes everything. You can credit the the proliferation of the word through the printing press with the Protestant Reformation. So that's the next thing. Now, my timeline's going to get a little choppy here because a lot of these things developed around the same time or within the same time span. So now we're going to the 19th century. So this is about, the year 1500, Gutenberg's printing press. Again, this is a Western-centric view. Like with the written word, I talked about Samaria. I also want to say that, the printing press, block printing, was something that was common in China way before it was common in, Europe. The printing press probably predates Gutenberg's press in China about by 1,000 years almost. So don't quote me on that because I'm not well versed in the Chinese printing press. But we should just say I should say that my education, like your education for the most part, is very Eurocentric. It has a very European slant about the way that we teach things. And when I can add a caveat, I will add a caveat that the printing press is not exclusive to the European context. That block printing emerged in China way before it emerges in Europe. So the next thing, I don't know if anybody knows what this is, but this is a photograph. Again, emerges in the Middle East, in a Islamic college actually, by a famous, I can't remember the guy exactly, but he invented the photograph almost 1,000 years before, maybe I think about 900 years before the actual ability to take an image was invented. So we knew of the camera for a long time, or the process of being able to generate an image and look at it, but we didn't know how to capture it. So chemical photography, this is chemical photography. So the ability to take an image, not just the word, but to take our senses, right? So when we talk about the medium, we're talking about our senses. So if the story is the use of words to convey what we saw, what we heard, what we tasted, what we touched, what we felt, and the written word was just a way to contain our spoken word, right? What we spoke, right? And the printing press took what we spoke that was written down and it now turns it into print and typography. The picture enabled us to convey actually what we saw, right? It enabled us to take a photographic representation of what we saw and send it somewhere else. Before the photograph, I could paint something, right? I could paint it, but that would still be an interpretation. If you've ever seen a cave painting or early paintings, if you've been to an art museum and seen early paintings and you see the emergence of, and this is not an art history class, but you see the emergence of perspectival space. You see the use of lighting, and you see, oh, this is Renoir, and he uses fantastic lighting, and look at the shadows in this picture, right? The photograph enabled us to really depict what was going on, and we didn't have to have a well-trained painter there to do it. It enabled me to take my site and send it around the world so people can see what the other side of the world looks like. Seeing is believing, right? Me telling you something, it's more difficult for me to believe if you just write it down and tell me. But if I see it, if I can see pictures, then I really believe it. So the photograph enables the characteristics of the photograph, um, are pretty fascinating because it's portable, right? Um, Again, it's asynchronous. I can take a picture of the aftermath of the Civil War and see what Gettysburg battlefield looked like. I didn't have to be there to see the carnage, right? So the picture enabled us to, really bear witness to something, right? It was an asynchronous medium. It could move around. It involved our sight, but not much more than that. It still was as slow as the fastest horse. It was still as slow as the fastest train. In order to get that picture to wherever it was going, it still had to travel. It was constrained by our mechanical processes, right? By how fast I can run, by how fast a horse could run, by how fast a train or a boat could take it, right? Now, when we talk about, we can mass produce the photo, right? We could find ways to copy the photo. All of that was well and good, right? Up to this point, we're talking about production and making mass quantities and massification. And that was fine, but it still moves as fast as, as fast as the crow flies, right? Then we get into the electronic medium. So we move into the telegraph, where we can send ideas, right, long distances, almost instantaneously, because of the electricity moves so fast, right? We're using electricity to send messages. We're using codes, right? It's not as rich as a photograph. It's not as rich as, a book, right? A book could contain much information. Telegraphs were very simple. So it wasn't a very rich medium. Very simple medium, but it traveled far, right? We could go across the ocean now. We could lay cables underneath the ocean and communicate with each other via telegraph. This is how during the World Wars that they were communicating. World War I, World War II, they were using telegraphs to get information out, right? This is how people were communicating, right? in the 19th century. I think, maybe it might startle people to think about us communicating between San Francisco and New York City prior to the telephone, right? And this was it. This is the telegraph, right? Um, Not a very rich medium. Dashes and dots, dit dit dot dot dit dit dot, right? And it would send these, and it had to be transcribed and transcoded by a person. They had machines that did it eventually, but this wasn't as rich, right? We could only transfer, um, but we could transfer that information synchronously, right? So now I could send it to you, and you'd have to be there to receive it. Eventually, there were machines that would record it, right? There would be ticker tape. And then ticker tape, in New York City, there's the ticker tape parade. Ticker tape is nothing more than telegraph messages that were sent out. So I didn't have to have somebody sitting next to the telegraph transcribing the information, right? I could have ticker tape, which would transcribe it for me, and then somebody can come back to it at a later date and actually put it into English, into words that I could actually, like the digital code today. When you see ones and zeros in a computer language, they don't really make sense, right? It has to be translated to human speak first. So it's not very rich, not as rich as, and this is an awful image that I had made from a transparency, but this is the gramophone. This is the ability to record sound and take the voice. So if the photo enabled us to send the richness of sight, the record enabled us to take the richness of the voice, of sound, of music, and send that all across the world. Again, it could travel slowly. It did travel slowly, right? It made it so that you could hear what Edison sounded like singing Mary Had a Little Lamb. You could hear what people on the other side of the world sounded like, right? The ability to capture something we've never been able to capture before. It's very recent. 200 years or less than 150 years ago, did we gain the ability to record what somebody sounds like. We have no idea what anyone sounds like prior to this invention. And that's a beautiful thing about a medium. This is a rich medium. It contains the richness of the human voice. Just like the picture is a rich medium, or the novel is a rich medium, the gramophone is a very rich medium. It contains everything, all the information you need. Um, very, very sophisticated technology for the time, even for today. I would say, um, its preservation is beautiful, right? But now we could hear what somebody sounds like across the world, and we could hear what people's music sounded like across the world. You just would have to print up these records and put the voice to the record, right? Which brings us um, to the radio. Radio is still probably the most powerful thing. I would say the radio shaped modern life. Without the radio, you wouldn't have what you have today. You certainly would not be using the cell phones you're using today, because the radio actually was very nice to give up some of its bandwidth to let you have 4G and now 5G that's gonna melt your brain. Um, you're gonna have you couldn't have this stuff without radio. The richness of the radio signal, and this enabled the high tech wars of World War One and World War Two. This enabled America to become a commercial society. You wouldn't have, the capitalism that you know today without radio. Radio programmed us. Radio programs, one of my favorite poets. He's a spoken word artist, Saul Williams. I don't want to misquote him, but he said something like, programming is just that, programming, or something like that. To understand the medium here, and I'm not going to go into this because this is going to come up, at the end of the semester when we dive into chapter 13, and we start looking into mass media. The radio really created a way of life. It enabled us to become a nation, right? It enabled the modern nation state to take shape. If I could listen to the same commercials in the same programs as a person in Arizona, um, somehow we were united in our ability to relate to the same thing. I could relate to the way people talk. Um, if you've ever traveled to like Boston, right, and heard an old person from Boston speak, or heard so my mother has a heavy accent. Okay, she's from Staten Island, but I don't know. I had a student from Staten Island, when I was teaching at RPI. He doesn't have the same accent my mom does. These accents, these old accents, are disappearing because people are now coming in greater contact with one another than they ever have before. And the radio enabled us to standardize what it means to be a nation, what it means to be American. We could transmit these ideas and we can program one another, right? We could literally program the thoughts and feelings, right? The sentiments of one another, right? The same thing that the television did on 9/11. On 9/11, when I was, a kid in school, I was almost done with high school. 9/11 happened. Everybody watched the same thing, and that led to a unification. And the radio did the same thing. Everybody heard D-Day. Everybody heard the troops storm Normandy, right? Everybody heard the same thing, and that's what the radio does. The radio enables us to take this rich, very rich medium of our voice, of music, of sound, of the programs that we develop and send them far and wide, right? I heard stories of people listening to Chicago radio all the way in Detroit, right? Now radio doesn't go as far, right? But AM radio still, you could tune in some AM stations, will travel all the way across the country. Radio enabled the richness of the voice to travel far and wide. So the telegraph was a little limiting in that sense, right? The gramophone or the record enabled the richness of the voice, but you still had to put it on a boat and send it across the world. Now the radio enabled people to talk far and wide, and this was the predecessor to our current satellite communication, right? And then I'm going to end here, for the sake of helping us understand maybe the non-digital side of things, because once we move into CDs and stuff like that, then then we're getting digital. But this is fundamental for our non-digital experience project. This is the cassette tape. This enabled us to make things portable. The radio was not super portable. The radio to this day, you can get radio like headsets and stuff, but you're kind of limited. It's a synchronous technology. You got to be there for the programming. You got to 6 o'clock. My favorite show is coming on. I got to get there, right? The cassette, right, made it portable once again, but it made it portable so you could put it in your car. You could go out for a jog with it, right? This is the predecessor to what we know portability to be today. When I was a kid, this was the technology. Like, this is what we had. We had cassettes. This made the world fantastic. I remember going on family vacation, sitting in the back of my dad's van, listening to cassette tapes on my Walkman. And that was cool, man. I really liked it. I remember recording my first radio show on this. This not only gave people a consumer device that you could record into, right? It gave us the portability. It gave me the ability to make a mixtape, right? To record songs off the radio, right? I still have cassettes today. I got them down in my entertainment center. I got cassettes from when I was a kid. I was recording songs off Z100, okay? So this made things portable. That was a characteristic of it. It's portability. It was asynchronous. I could listen to the songs when I wanted to listen to them. I didn't just have to listen to them on the radio when they were presented to me. Okay? Now I know, the vinyl has been around. The vinyl was there, but the vinyl was not quite as portable. Right? It's a delicate, fragile technology. If you hit a bump in your car and you're playing a record player, it'll scratch on the record. The cassette was durable. It was portable. It moved the way we moved. It enabled us to move once again. We didn't have to be tied to the console, the entertainment console. Now we could break ourselves off from that entertainment console, right? So that's the characteristic of the cassette. I hope this lecture helped clear up exactly what I'm looking for from the non-digital experience. When you reflect on your use of a non-digital technology, I want you to reflect on the characteristics. What is it about the working of this medium? Right? What is the physical workings of this medium that make it unique? Not what's the content. I don't care what the content is. I don't care that this cassette is Duran Duran, okay? I don't care that this cassette has Green Day on it. I don't care that this cassette is MC Hammer, right? I want to know what the cassette does. I want to know if the cassette got tangled up in the cassette player, stuff like that. So that's the medium. Thank you very much.